Jamie, thanks for joining us. Pleasure to have you on. So I ask all my guests this at the very beginning. How are you and how has COVID affected you?
Well, thanks for having me on as well. Firstly, I'm pretty good, to be honest, and it's been a funny old journey, hasn't it? I think for us all. And when it first happened, to be honest, I was pretty pissed off, like angry actually, is how I would describe it. Because I think you start thinking about the worst case scenario, and this sounds really selfish, but I wasn't thinking, oh no, feeling sorry for all the people who were, obviously suffering and getting ill and all that kind of thing. I suppose I was thinking about the impact on me. But that's the honest side of it. So my initial,
I think that's normal though. I think a lot of people did that. I was the same.
Yeah.
We were due to have a baby, and he was born in May, and we were just thinking, oh Christ, the maternity unit's closed. We how are we going to have the baby and things like that. So I think that's understandable.
Yeah, I think it is, and I think it's hopefully you reflect on it a little bit and think, actually, I've actually been pretty lucky. But I think it's tough, innit? You start thinking about your business. Is that gonna, people, my business is based upon triathletes, and buying stuff off me in order to make themselves better. And then when their races are cancelled, are they going to do that as much? So you start worrying about that, having a house extended, so there's bills to pay and all those things. And those are your normal daily pressures, aren't they? So yeah, you think about that. But to be honest, I think hopefully we've come out of it reasonably unscathed, and it's been an interesting experience and maybe given us all a bit of a chance to have a think about a few things and where our lives are going. And actually, in my case, probably just realised that I'm probably pretty happy with how things are, which I guess is a good thing,
And and we've been sort of saying to people on the show here, like, this is an opportunity like no other, where you've got chance to put something right, in the sense of what part of your triathlon training or you as an athlete hasn't been working well, whether that be you want to really work on your technique for swimming, although swimming pools haven't been open, so maybe that's a bad example, or you had a niggle, or you've done something that it's just an opportunity to reset, maybe take it as an extended sort of winter break or whatever, and just lay the foundations ready for when we do get back to training.
No, I couldn't agree with that more. I mean, that was my sort of first thoughts for myself, I suppose. So I've done like a fair bit more sort of strength training than I perhaps would do normally, because I've got a bit more time. I bought a bit of kit. I was lucky to be able to get hold of some just before they started selling out. Basically, bought some stuff, thought I'll give myself can't go to the gym. I quite like going to the gym. That was out of the question. You can go running and cycling easy enough. Swimming was obviously out, but yeah, I spent a bit of time doing some more weights and working on imbalances and trying to make myself a bit more robust, I guess. And I think it's been, talking to people who I'm currently working with, a lot of them have seen it as an opportunity to sort of deal with some of their nutritional challenges. And to be fair, I think it's been a good time for that, because of the fact that socialising's been out of the window, and obviously that's a time where a lot of people go wrong with their diet and stuff. So yeah, it's trying to see the good in everything, isn't it? Positives.
Well, yeah, and I think if you just focus on the fact you haven't got races, or you were due to do this big race as your focus for the year, it's easy to get bogged down with it, and then all of a sudden everything impacts you. So you think, oh, what's the point in training? And for me, if I'm not training, I just become a grumpy so-and-so. So
absolutely, yeah,
you've got to have some sort of focus. So
yeah.
I connected with yourself through Instagram. So for those who are listening to the podcast who may not know you, sort of describe sort of your business and what services you offer to the community.
Yeah, so basically, I got a triathlon nutrition coaching business, I guess. So started, I think it was about 2014, 15, something like that. And I've always been like really interested in nutrition, which I'm sure we'll go into in a bit more detail about my past in a minute, but it was an area that I was very interested in. Always been involved in endurance sport. I say always, probably from the age of about 18-ish. And I was looking to start a business, I guess, helping people. And I started doing it face-to-face with a few local triathletes, and then moved online. So basically, I provide nutrition coaching for triathletes, which basically is a 12-week program whereby we look at your current diet, where maybe you can make some improvements to recovery, fueling, maybe body composition, race day, etc., and come up with a plan which allows you to, I guess, become fitter, healthier, stronger, maybe leaner if necessary.
And you mentioned it already, but so like, what is your journey into triathlon? How did you get involved in the sport?
So I think my first one was I think it was 2000, or 2001, somewhere around then. And so if I go back in time, I've done a podcast on this myself, actually, which is, you can, maybe I'll send you the link or something, and people can, if you want to.
Send us a link, I'll put it in the description.
Yeah, then if you want more detail, they can have it. But basically, in a nutshell, I was overweight as a kid, for whatever reason, maybe to do with like asthma and steroids and stuff like that, maybe just to do the fact I was a greedy little bugger, more likely. But I still am, to be honest. But anyway, yeah, so I got overweight, struggled with that. I think probably, like, honestly, my self-esteem was probably, I wouldn't say like really low. I could exaggerate and say I was in a terrible place. I don't think I was in a terrible place, but I wasn't happy. I suppose I was always quite good at sport, but like maybe not quite as good as I wanted to be, and that kind of thing. And maybe, if I'm really honest, a lot of it was down to the fact that as a young sort of teenager, if you're overweight, you perhaps don't feel as attractive to the opposite sex, which, pretty shallow, but that's where you're at maybe in those years.
Where you're a teenager, aren't you? And unfortunately, teenagers are shallow.
That's it, yeah. So basically, I struggled with weight a little bit, tried various ways to lose weight, failed, and then went to uni, and I was doing sociology, of all things, and politics, because I didn't know what else to do. And so did that. And when I was there, I remember thinking to myself, I want to become a little bit more serious. I've been a bit of a lazy bastard. Sort of, all I did was, well, I loved life, I suppose, but the bits of life I loved was drinking, going out, getting a pizza on the way home, being pretty unhealthy. And so I decided I need to change this. This is about 18-ish. So I'd always been involved in sport a little bit and going to the gym and whatnot. So I started going to the gym again, started doing a bit of running, and then I started rowing, of all things. So I joined a rowing club, which was in my local town. And I don't really know why I did, but I think it was from a conversation I had with my dad. But I went down there, got involved with rowing. And at the time, this was sort of like late 90s, rowing training revolved an awful lot around running. So got into running, lost weight, realised I was actually half decent at running. Because up until that point, I'd only done cross country at school, and I wasn't good at that. But realised I was quite good at running. The more weight I lost, faster I got. Went about the weight loss all the wrong way, but nonetheless, lost weight, got faster at running. Rowed quite a bit, but rowing's like a sport which is sort of better for bigger people. And I'm sort of 5'11", 11 stone, so there is lightweight rowing, which is good for people of my dimensions, but yeah, it perhaps wasn't suited to me in the same way that running was. But despite that, and this tells you something perhaps about my psyche and perhaps the psyche of other people, that because I wasn't sort of naturally good at it, I wanted to be good at it even more. So worked really hard at becoming good at it, and I did actually get half decent. But always when I was rowing, I would do a bit of running, probably because I was good at it and I liked it. And then, as a result of that, a friend of mine who I went to school with, a girl, her dad, he was well into running in the 80s. He was sort of like did the first London Marathon, all that sort of stuff. And I think it was at 18th or 21st or something like that. And I was chatting to him, telling him, I've been doing a bit of running. He was like, "What about doing a triathlon?" And I was like, "Yeah, actually, I quite fancy that," because I used to do a bit of swimming as a kid, and I was half decent at swimming. Didn't have a bike, but I was like, "Yeah, let's do that." So he was a member of Manchester Triathlon Club, and he knew of a sprint, a local sprint that was going on near us, which was just like, I don't even know whether they did it more than once. It was called the Friar Tuck Triathlon, and it was held from a swimming pool in Runcorn in the northwest. And so I signed up for that. Didn't have a bike, didn't have a helmet, and you obviously needed a helmet. I had no gear. This is probably like commonplace. I'm sure people always tell these stories. Triathlon, I was on a mountain bike. So I did it on my dad's bike. My dad had this old bike, which was like an old steel-framed road bike, but nothing like we have now. No helmet. Borrowed a helmet off Jeff, my mate's dad, but it wasn't a helmet. It's like a BMX type style.
I know, yeah, but like a chin.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so I borrowed that. I couldn't believe it when he gave it me. I was like, "Come on, Jeff, I can't. There's no way. I'm not too worried about how I look on, but at the same time, anyway, so did it and did a bit of training for it, but not loads. I did a bit of swimming, not much cycling, but a bit of running. Did that one, and I actually did quite well. I can't remember exactly where I finished, but I was somewhere like top 20, and it wasn't a big event. There was maybe a couple of hundred people doing it, but I thought, actually, considering the setup, I've actually done half decently there. And then spoke to Jeff afterwards, and he was like, "Yeah, did really well. Like everybody, spent like 5 minutes in transition. Didn't understand any of that business. Pretty typical stuff, I guess, for people going into it from the first time. I think perhaps the difference was that when I started it, because that was like 2001-ish, so the internet had started, but you couldn't go on the internet and look up how to become a triathlete. There was no websites, there was no coaching. I've got a book out actually from the library, and I can't remember what it was called, but I remember reading a book on triathlon, and that was how it started basically. And then I just sort of skip over it. So from there, I continued rowing, but still did some running. So did a couple of marathons, and then what I did was sort of every year, when the rowing season finished, I'd do a couple of local sprints, just to sort of keep fitness up and do like something different. And generally always did half decently, but never had like the right gear. Never bought myself a time trial bike or anything like that. But yeah, that's how it started for me, basically.
Okay. And yeah, your story there is very familiar to what other people have said, and I often think you get two types of people within triathlon. You get those who are sensible about it and will borrow equipment from friends and family because they have no other choice, or because triathlon attracts a certain type of person, and because maybe triathlon attracts people who are a little bit older. Maybe they've come from team sports. I was one of them. Maybe they've got a little bit more disposable income. You then get these individuals who go out and they'll buy all the equipment under the sun to do one triathlon and then turn around and find out it's not for them. Whereas we often say, beg, borrow and steal stuff. Test it. Do you like the sport? Then go out and maybe upgrade things.
Yeah, and I think that's right. I think it's like, I think as humans we're attracted by shiny stuff, and triathlon is a great example of having lots of shiny stuff that you can spend a lot of money on that ain't going to make you quicker. You might look half decent, but I would rather look dreadful and be faster than look awesome and be crap.
Yeah,
To
yeah.
be honest.
Look, for my first triathlon, I bought a £400 bike from eBay. I suppose I didn't have to do that. I could have borrowed the bike, but I still got that bike to this day, and I love it. It's yeah, it was brilliant. It was probably about 4 years old at the time. Steel frame. It may have carbon forks, or someone may have told me it had carbon forks, and it probably didn't. And I use that as my winter bike now, and it's probably a little bit like what's his name? Trigger's sort of broomstick. It's probably
Yeah.
has so many different parts changed. Whether it's still the same bike, I don't know. But yeah, I love it. And my biggest bit of advice to everyone who's starting off in the sport, beg, borrow, and steal to begin with. Buy second hand if you have to, and just test out the sport. It's the only way to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. Great.
So, moving on, and I suppose this is the reason why I got you on. I want to talk about nutrition, and I want to talk about how to approach nutrition as a triathlete, because I think people have this perception that, especially if you're going longer distance in triathlon, it doesn't matter what you eat as long as you take in the calories. And to a certain degree, they are sort of right. But I'm pretty sure you would disagree with that as well, because for me, it's about good calories, not necessarily junk calories.
Yeah, so I think it is interesting. I think it depends where you're at in your mindset and maybe your own knowledge and understanding and stuff. So if I use myself as a great example, when I was training a lot when I was younger, I ate a whole load of shit, and to be honest with you, like got away with it from a body composition point of view. But I was training enormous amounts in comparison to what most people do, and I didn't have a full-time job. So, if you're, I would say I was like 23 student, training 3-4 hours a day, plenty of rest, able to kind of eat badly and sort of get away with it. But having said that, I look at that partly fondly because it reminds me of more simple times. But at the same time, I think what you don't realise is you might be getting away with it from a body composition point of view, i.e. you're not getting fat. But there's no question at all about the fact that you're not going to be fueling well. Your health is going to be not optimal. And as a result, you're not going to recover as well. So you might get away with it because you're young. Now, most people probably who do triathlon, like you've alluded to, maybe a lot of people start it later in life, they come from other sports. So actually, if you're not 23, you have to be way more precise about your nutrition. I can't say there's an age on it. I think genetically, some people will always get away with it better than others, but we shouldn't be relying on our genetics to give us an excuse to eat shit, basically. So I can't actually remember what your question was. I've just got off on one.
But no, you are answering it. It's about how you approach it, and it's about, for me, right? I've always been relatively lean as a youngster. If in the summer holidays, if I wasn't out of the house playing football with my mates for 7-8 hours a day, there was probably something wrong. So I would, if I didn't have a ball at my feet, I had a ball in my hands, and I would run all day. But I didn't come into the sport until later. And like you said, I got away with it when I was younger. My diet probably wasn't bad, but at the same time, it probably wasn't great. There's probably quite a lot of yellow food that went in the oven.
Yeah.
A lot of like oven chips and nuggets and things like that. and I'm 39 now, and it's only taken an injury and a couple of kids that have come along the way for me to really get out of shape, and probably from a body composition point of view, the worst I've ever been in my life. And then COVID hit, and I couldn't go to the gym, and and then a newborn, and without making excuses, all of a sudden I'm thinking, right, okay, it seems to have been easily put on, but I know now the hard work is trying to get it off.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what you've described there is a common scenario. As we get older, it gets harder. But one of the reasons it gets harder is not that physiologically we've declined that much. It's more about the other demands on our time and energy. And once you get a little bit extra weight on, it is definitely harder to get it off. So I think for us all, triathlete or not, it's actually very important that we stay within a healthy-ish range. Our weight will fluctuate always a little bit, obviously, and we're okay with that. If you could have a 3 or 4 kilo range, say for me, it's probably between 70 and 74 kilos. I know I'm okay roughly, and sometimes I go a bit below, but I never go above 70, 74, something like that, because if I do, then I'll know it's a hard road back. So you just keep an eye on it and allow it to fluctuate if you go on holiday or Christmas or something like that. But basically, don't let it get out of hand so that you can bring it back within a few weeks, of decent food.
Yeah, and and I'm definitely in that situation at the moment. And the big thing for me is, and the people listening to the podcast are probably sick of me saying this, but I got away with it in my youth because I went to the gym quite a lot, and from a weight training point of view, I was doing that quite regularly. Then triathlon came along, and my weight training or strength and conditioning side of things really declined. And I've noticed a big difference lately because I've probably lost a little bit of muscle definition and muscle size and mass. And then that topped on with a crap diet over the last 6 months is probably put me in a worse position than I've ever been in my life as regards to fitness.
Yeah, and I think that's actually a valid point that you've touched on there with regard to triathletes. That I think, like when we chatted just before the podcast, I was saying I've been doing a bit of strength stuff during lockdown, etc. I think that if you look at triathlon training and you look at people who do it, you only have to look around, and I don't mean this disrespectfully, but there's an awful lot of people who do triathlon who don't look like they do triathlon. And it's not about looking like you can, but maybe there's something to be read into that, and that's because people's diet isn't good enough. They think they can out-train it. They think they can get away with eating what they want and drinking what they want because they're doing such a volume of training. But the training is often not intense enough, in my view. The training very rarely includes any sort of strength work. What they might just do is an awful lot of training, but in this grey area. So the easy sessions aren't easy enough. The hard sessions aren't hard enough. All the sessions are just clumped together in this comfortable bit. So we're not giving our muscles enough stimulation. We're not giving our aerobic system enough stimulation. We're just sort of going through the motions and not being quite scientific enough about it, perhaps.
Look, and I'm based in South Wales. You can tell by my accent. And within Cardiff, where I am, triathlon's gone through the roof. It's booming, and it's probably helped because of events like Ironman Wales. You've got Long Course Weekend as well, run by Activity Wales locally. It's huge. It attracts thousands and thousands of people to the area. But what I found within our area is very similar. I got the same story. You got people who played a lot of rugby because it's a rugby and football predominantly area. Rugby is probably just as high as football as regards to participation levels. And you get a lot of big chaps then come in and looking for that next challenge in life. Maybe for whatever reason they can't do rugby anymore because their knees or their shoulders or their neck they can't do it anymore. But they're not ready to give up being active. They're not ready to give up that community aspect that they would have had probably from team sports. And the different sizes of people that I see training, it varies massively. And you've got some big guys out there who are training. There's a number of ex-rugby internationals who have done Ironman Wales, and a really good example of one of them is Ryan Jones. Ryan Jones, he's captain Wales. He captained the British and Irish Lions. And he was a big chap. He was in the back row. He played second row as well at times. He's a big chap. But if you see him now, he's still tall, but he's so lean. and
Yeah.
and it's just because he's thrown himself into it, and he's an extreme because he was at the pinnacle of elite, he's a professional sports person, and he might have the position to put himself into, to throw himself into triathlon. But what I'm getting at is, yeah, there's some big guys in South Wales who are, getting into triathlon, and hats off to them for
Yeah,
doing it.
absolutely.
But as a leaner guy, and doing triathlons in South Wales, there's no flat ones, that's for sure. They're all
Yeah.
loads of hills, and so I'll climb all day, but I tell you what, I'll climb and they bomb down the other end. And
That's it.
I'm terrible at going downhill, but Jesus Christ, some of these guys, unbelievable.
Yeah, no. I've had the same. You do something. You get to. I did a really hilly one once years ago in Saddleworth, and I was flying up these hills. Like, I'm really quite pleased with myself. I was weighing about 67 kilos. Just easy. Well, it wasn't easy, but it felt easy looking at these big units next to me struggling up the hills. And then I'd go to coming down the hill, and I just remember looking across, and this guy just came thundering past. I'm like, and he's massive, and he's all this weight behind him, and he's braver than me, to be honest. But
Well, I ride with a couple of guys who are motorcyclists, and again, they're the biggest chaps. I tell you what, their descending skills are something to be seen. They're brilliant. They'll bomb past me, literally like 50 miles an hour downhill plus. It's unbelievable. So as a triathlete, if I was to come to yourself, what would you first do with me to sort of just assess where I am within my situation?
Yeah, so I think it's probably the same as it would be with anybody else, really. From a non-active background, the first thing is to look at get a few bits of information. So we obviously look at your current diet. So we do a food diary, very simple. You'd write down what you ate for a few days. What we have to be mindful of course, is that sometimes the very act of doing a food diary means that people eat better. So I'm quite keen to make sure that people are honest about that, what they do actually eat, and not to feel judged either that I'm saying, oh, you've had a pizza, you fat bastard, you can't be, you shouldn't be doing that, because we all eat crap from time to time. So if you're going to eat it, put it on there. So that's the first thing. Then it's a matter of looking at their training, a little bit to do with their lifestyle. So how active they are day to day, what time they're getting up, what time they're going to bed. And that's one of the most fascinating things to me, because I'm very lucky that my life, essentially, I've sort of created my life around my work. So I don't have to get up at 3 a.m. and go for a swim. I can have a bit more of a normal day. And looking at some of the people's lifestyles, the amount of sacrifices they're making in order to train are phenomenal. But obviously that puts a big stress on their body and brain and relationships, etc. So it's important I understand that. So we do that, look at sort of measurements. So obviously weight is one of them, but also not just taking that in isolation. So using measuring techniques, very straightforward. So like a tape measure, you measure various points of the body, leg, arm, waist, hips, chest, that kind of thing. And then I also take some photographs, so I can see, because my business is online, it's really useful to sort of see somebody's body actually and how they kind of hold their fat. Some of the times I'll speak to people before we start working together, and they'll say, oh, I'm pretty lean, and then I'll see the picture and I'm like, oh, I expected to see something different. or likewise, sometimes people say I'm carrying way too much fat, and then I look at the picture and I'm like, wow, you look pretty good shape, to be honest. So it's quite useful to get those pictures. And then obviously a performance test, essentially. So that can often be literally if you've done a 5K run or an FTP test or something like that, some sort of measurable, so that I can see how the changes to their nutrition will obviously hopefully positively affect various things, body composition, by means of obviously weight, measurements, photos, performance by the performance test. And if all of those things are moving in the right direction, then I'm happy. So yeah, that's the assessment part of it.
And then I'm assuming, because you've mentioned it already, do you take into account what their goals are for the year? So if
absolutely, yeah.
The goal is to, I don't know, run the Marathon des Sables, for example. that you're going to know from that their training is going to be right up there with as many as any others would be.
Yeah, so I mean, it's go. So there's different goals, I guess. So when they fill out the form, they will say what the main event is for the year, any other events that obviously leading up to it, and then what perhaps they perceive as their biggest area for change. So this literally is a list, and it'll say, do you want to improve your strength, improve your, do you want to lose weight, do you want to gain weight? Occasionally I work with people who find it really hard to maintain weight, they just lose so much weight. So whatever their goals are, and then I can obviously set the plan specifically to them, basically.
And will you then, when you set the plan, will you make suggestions on physical meals to make?
Yeah, so I mean, it's a tricky one, really, that, because what I don't think there is much value in a prescriptive kind of meal plan. Sometimes I get people, and that's what they want. I think because with training, they'll be given a training plan. So in their words, I've had this said quite a few times, the coach will say, right, you're going to do a 3-hour bike on Sunday, so they'll do a 3-hour bike. And they like that kind of prescriptive.
Yeah.
But diet's very different. I mean, because I could say, for the next month, you need to eat exactly this, then and they would probably do it for a month. But we have got to spend a lifetime of eating and being surrounded by food. So it's really important that I teach my sort of clients how to become more responsible, more knowledgeable, and that actually means giving them freedom. So it's not a prescriptive plan. There are suggestions for breakfast, lunch, dinner, snacks, etc. And as we go through the process, if people require help with kind of other ideas, then I will give them. But it's also about them learning to understand about calories, macronutrients, micronutrients, and basically understand how to put together a plan for themselves for the rest of their life. And I'm basically giving them the tools to be able to do that.
And you mentioned there, and it was one of the questions I was going to ask you actually, around macro and micro. And I don't think everyone fully understands them, or doesn't fully understand what they mean in regards to their nutrition. And before we came on the podcast, we were talking about how Instagram and other social media sort of like one highlights these sort of different trends, but also maybe doesn't necessarily highlight them in the most effective way, because people now are thinking, I got to get my macros in on things, but I don't think they fully understand what they are to begin with. So can you say a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head. I mean, people never used to talk about macros. You only have to go back 5 years, 6 years, and people wouldn't know what the hell you were on about. Whereas now, if I wasn't that long ago, I was talking to, I was in the gym actually, so it must have been pre-lockdown. And there was a woman in there that I knew, and her daughter was in there. And her daughter, maybe she was like 22 or something. And I was chatting to the mum, and she said, "Oh, my daughter would like a little word with you." Actually, I was, "All right, yeah, what's up?" And she's like, "Oh yeah, I was wondering whether you could give me some advice on my macros." I was like, "What? What are you on about?" And obviously, your mum knew what I did. I was like, "Why? Where have you got this from?" And it was from Instagram. So she'd been, she's obviously somebody that she's following on Instagram. I don't know who it was, so I can't slate him. But I made the judgment, I suppose, maybe wrongly, that this youngish girl has probably been following some sort of fitness model type person who has made a suggestion on certain macronutrient ratios in order to end up looking like her. Not taking into account, obviously, the fact that this Instagram celebrity is obviously only ever pictured when she's looking her absolute best in perfect lighting with a tan. She's genetically superior. She's essentially a model. And her full-time job is to look a certain way. Nobody knows about any disordered eating that she might have. How any of the backstory. She shows you what she wants you to see. And this young girl, of course, has fallen for this hook, line, and sinker and thinks that simply by getting her macros right, she will end up looking like this Instagram model. So I suppose what I'm saying is macros are a part of the picture for sure. Understanding that, generally speaking, to be completely honest, basically protein, setting protein at a certain level is important for most people, like whether you're a sedentary person or whether you're an athlete. And that, depending upon the amount of training you do and the type of training, will influence where your protein sits. But your protein is probably the most important in some respects, from a body composition, from a recovery point of view, from a satiety point of view. And then it's a matter of fiddling around with your carbs and fats to suit you. Some people love eating carbs, some people don't. Some people prefer eating more fatty foods. So it's about making it fit your tastes. There's some suggestion that certain body types will respond better to different macronutrient ratios. And I think there might be a little bit of truth in that. But again, if you get your protein and your calories right, then actually, if you're 5% off on your carbs, then it's not going to make too much difference, Yeah,
no, exactly. And I you touched on it there, and you hit the nail on the head with people are following a certain celebrity, so to speak, and they're not fully understanding what it is and just expecting sort of quick fixes. Like you said, if I get my macros and that right, I'll have this amazing body and things, and ultimately it doesn't work like that.
No, it doesn't. And I think you've got to be quite. I mean, it's a difficult one actually. I've been, being on social media, and the same with you. You are projecting a certain image, and if you're not careful, I put a picture of me on Instagram. I think it was on Facebook recently, and I would basically have my top off, and I looked pretty good, but I've made it very clear that I was tensing the shit out of my abs in order to achieve that. And I was in decent lighting. I'd been my nutrition had been pretty good, as it mostly is, but there's also plenty of times where I don't look like that, and I probably wouldn't post them pictures. But I'm a bit more mature, a bit more honest. And I still don't necessarily post the bad pictures. But then, of course, you get the other end of the spectrum where people are posting really bad pictures in order to sort of create this sort of sensational sort of, oh, look, even me, I can end up being fat just like you too. And so that's a load of nonsense as well. So I think it's we've got to be mindful when we consume social media that actually people are just showing us what they want us to see, basically.
And then the final thing I wanted to ask you was around sort of how you advise athletes on 2 points: race day nutrition, or not necessarily race day nutrition, but high intensity activity nutrition, and then recovery. And what sort of advice do you give on that?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, I think maybe just say a little bit about race day. I think race day, traditionally speaking, if you look at triathlon in particular, and any endurance sport, actually, what people would do is obviously a carb load, which isn't far off the mark in my view. But what people would ultimately get wrong is they just have one massive meal, which would usually be pasta, and literally as much as you could have.
Exactly, and also their body is not conditioned to it. So
that's right.
Once every few weeks before they have a race, the night before, massive bowl of pasta, eat as much as you can, and then expect to feel amazing the next morning.
Absolutely, and actually, interestingly, just when I was rowing, we were racing, and it's a bit of a different setup. So rowing, there was a big regatta which happens during the week, and the races were in the afternoon. And so the coaches were all about eating loads of pasta for your lunch. And I remember having this mound of pasta for my lunch, and the race was about 3, I think. And everyone was like, "Oh, feel." I was like, that's why, we basically ate a load of shite, and our blood sugar's gone through the roof, and now we've dropped through the floor, and we feel tired. But anyway, so I think what's important to understand when you're looking at race day, I'll just say this quickly, is that very often as we go into a race, especially our main race of the year, we also taper. So our energy output is much lower. So our energy input might need to be higher, but it likely doesn't need to be anywhere near as high as we think it needs to be. So if you're having a taper week, so let's use someone as an example. If you're doing an Ironman, what I generally advise people to do is say they're starting the taper a week or 2 weeks out, whatever it might be. From a week out, in terms of their nutrition, they might ever so slightly start to slowly move the carbohydrate upward. So instead of having 1 or 2 big days beforehand, you're gradually increasing it from a week out. Now, the shorter the event, you can bring that closer to race day. So with a sprint, it might be 2 days out. But again, you're only moving your calories up slightly, taking into consideration your taper. And the way that you take your calories up is definitely through the increase of carbohydrate. And that would be the same for if you're doing a high intensity activity. You're going to fuel mainly on a high intensity activity from carbohydrate. So increasing carbs is important. Now, I also hear some people saying, yeah, but Ironman's not high intensity. Well, no, it is not. But your body is still going to be, at certain times, you're going to be burning carbohydrate, climbing hills, getting onto the bike when you get the bike moving, and there's that energy required, the same with a run. So it is useful to have, in my view, carbohydrate or glycogen in your system in order to fuel yourself, basically.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And it's nice to hear other people say you don't have to have that massive bowl of pasta. It's ridiculous. And then, final point from us then. What about from a recovery point of view? Do you advise, because people often talk about this magic window straight after activity and trying to get protein in you. Is that something that you advise as well?
So I think it's slightly controversial subject. I was talking to someone about it yesterday, one of my clients, and she was asking the same. And also, I'll say what I said to her. Basically, the evidence is that probably what matters most is that daily your intake matches a certain number. So, for example, your protein has to be at 30% of your total calories, and that your calories are at whatever they might be relevant to you. So then, as long as you hit that on that day, you're probably going to be okay. What you can do to be extra sure is to essentially try and make sure that you're consuming good quality protein and relatively fast absorbing carbs post training. So good examples of that would always be, well, this is good. It's a good example. It's also very easy. You have a banana and a protein shake. So the banana, obviously carbohydrate, is also some sort of potassium, etc. So you're going to get some sort of minerals in there, which are going to help with the sort of rehydration process. Then you get some protein in, a simple whey protein, nothing fancy. Mixed it with water. You could mix it with milk if you wanted, so you get a little bit more carbohydrate, a little bit of fat as well, a little bit more protein. So they're good examples of very easy ways to recover. I think ideally you should try to have something after you've trained, but if you don't, it doesn't matter as much as hitting your daily targets, basically.
I think that's fair enough. Right, Jamie, I'm aware that we've probably gone on a little bit longer than we had desired to. How can guys and girls get in contact with you? What's the website? What's the Twitter handles and all that malarkey?
Yeah, so on Facebook, I'm Triathlon Nutrition Coach. Instagram, Triathlon Nutrition Coach. I think Twitter, Triathlon Nutrition Coach. Website is NutriTri. But yeah, I guess like most people, social media is the best way. But yeah, if you type in NutriTri in Google, I'll pop up, and there's a bit more details on that as well.
Well, I'll put your details into the description, whatever channel we put this out on. Pleasure to have you on. Thank you very much for coming on. We'd love to have you back on in the future, and we can chat more about how we can support the triathlon community.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd be happy to. It'd be nice to talk to you again. Yeah, for sure.
No worries. Right. Thank you for that, and we speak soon.
All right. Cheers.